Title: Infidelity Nest, the night that changed everything. Intro line: Welcome to Infidelity Nest. In today's video, we step into a story about love, distance, and the dangerous ways loneliness can disguise itself as connection. I never thought a single evening could redraw the entire map of my life. It started as an ordinary night, quiet, harmless, the kind that should have passed without meaning. But sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that echo the loudest. The sky that evening looked calm, stretched in soft shades of fading gold. I remember setting the table for two, though deep down, I already knew only one chair would be filled. My husband George had called earlier, his voice distant and distracted. "Another late meeting," he'd said, like always. By then, those words had lost their weight. Our marriage had become something like an old photograph, still framed, still present, but colorless. We smiled when people were watching. We went through motions that looked like love. But somewhere in the middle of all that pretending, the connection slipped away. What remained between us wasn't affection. It was habit. And habit, when it lasts too long, starts to feel like a cage. That summer stretched endlessly, sunlight pouring through every window, mocking the emptiness inside. I tried to fill my days, gardening, reading, pretending that silence wasn't growing louder. But there are kinds of loneliness that books and flowers can't cure. Then came Liam, George's son from his first marriage. 21, polite, a little reserved, the kind of boy who still carried the weight of trying to prove himself. He arrived one weekend with a small suitcase and a hesitant smile. His mother had recently moved abroad, and George thought a few weeks with us would help him find his footing. I didn't expect his presence to change anything. At first, it was simple, two people sharing the same space. Morning coffee, shared chores, small conversations that made the air less heavy. He helped in the garden. He'd laugh softly when I told stories about how George and I met, though even then, I could see something flicker behind his smile. Something like curiosity or confusion. There was nothing wrong about it. Not yet, but loneliness is a patient architect. It builds bridges where there should be walls. One evening, George called again. His voice came through the phone like static. "Don't wait up," he said. I remember the exact sound of the clock ticking after the call ended. Each second sharper than the last. The house felt too big. Too still. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on a movie I wasn't really watching. The sound filled the silence, but not the emptiness. Then, footsteps on the stairs. Liam walked in, hair still damp from a shower, wearing a hoodie too big for him. He looked comfortable in that space, in a way that startled me. He gave a small smile and said, "You're still up?" I nodded. Couldn't sleep. He sat across from me, the distance between us a fragile kind of safety. We talked about nothing at first, about movies, about his plans for college, about how George always seemed too busy for anyone. There was an honesty in his tone I hadn't heard from anyone in a long time. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You seem lonely," I tried to laugh to brush it off. Everyone gets lonely sometimes. But his gaze didn't shift. He looked at me the way people look at paintings. Not for what they are, but for what they're hiding. For a moment I felt seen. Not as a wife, not as a housekeeper of routine, but as a person. And that realization shook something in me. After that night, the air in the house began to feel different. Not heavy, but charged, as though something unspoken lived between us. He'd linger a little longer in the kitchen when I was cooking. Ask questions about my past. Notice the smallest things. The perfume I wore. The music I played while doing chores. The way I tapped my fingers when I was lost in thought. It wasn't wrong, I told myself. It was just kindness. Just attention. But attention, when you've been starved of it for years, feels like sunlight after a long winter. And you don't realize how close you're standing to the fire until it burns. Weeks passed. George's absences grew longer. His calls shorter. Sometimes he wouldn't even call. I'd find myself sitting in the living room, listening to the quiet hum of the house, waiting for a sound. any sound, to remind me I wasn't alone. Liam would be there sometimes, reading in the next room, headphones around his neck but never playing music, as though he was waiting too, for something unnamed. One afternoon, we sat outside on the porch. The garden was full of dying flowers, the kind that bloom once and then vanish quietly. I said something about how everything beautiful fades too fast. He replied softly, "Maybe that's what makes it beautiful." That sentence stayed with me for days. The nights grew longer, conversations deeper. I learned things about him, how he felt lost between two homes, how he wanted to be someone his father could be proud of, how he envied people who felt like they belonged somewhere. And in his words, I heard echoes of myself. We were two people caught in the same silence, reaching for warmth in a house that had forgotten how to give it. Then came the evening that changed everything. George called again. Another business trip, another excuse. I didn't even ask when he'd be home. I sat in the living room, a half-empty wine glass beside me, staring at the flickering screen of the TV. Liam walked in quietly, hesitated for a moment, then said, "Do you ever wish things were different?" I turned toward him, unsure what he meant. He continued, "Like, if you could start over, would you?" His voice wasn't bold, just honest, raw in a way that stripped the air of pretense. I told him everyone has moments they wish they could rewrite. He nodded slowly. "Even the ones that can't be fixed?" There was something in that question that settled in my chest like a stone. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the movie filled the silence, but both of us had stopped watching. He said softly, "I don't think George deserves you." It was such a simple sentence, but it shattered something. I told him not to say things like that. That it wasn't fair, that he didn't understand. But part of me knew he did. Maybe too well. And in that moment, with the weight of years of neglect pressing down on me, I realized how thin the line is between comfort and danger. I don't remember how long we sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. We didn't speak about what almost happened. We didn't need to. The silence said enough, but the damage was already done. Not in action, but in emotion. Because once you allow yourself to want what you shouldn't, it changes you. Morning came, cruel and bright. I stood by the window, watching sunlight crawl across the floorboards. I told myself it was just a moment, something that could be forgotten, erased by time. But Liam didn't seem to want to forget. His presence lingered in quiet ways, a folded note left on the counter, a brief touch on my arm that felt like a question neither of us could answer. He didn't say much, but when he looked at me, I could feel the weight of everything we'd left unspoken. And the worst part? A part of me didn't want to escape it, because for the first time in years I felt alive, not happy, not content, but alive. It wasn't love. I knew that. It was loneliness reaching out to loneliness, two broken pieces pretending they could fit together. But the heart doesn't understand logic. It understands feeling, and once it tastes warmth after years of cold, it keeps craving it, even when it knows the cost. The days that followed were a quiet blur of guilt and confusion. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Footsteps, doors closing, the sound of George's name mentioned on the phone. Every time Liam entered the room, I felt both comfort and panic. Every time he left, I felt emptier than before. I tried to convince myself that I could fix everything. That if I kept my distance, things would return to normal. But normal is a fragile illusion once you've broken it. Eventually, Liam left, off to college, off to start the life he was meant to live. He didn't say goodbye in words. He just looked at me one last time, a look that said everything words couldn't, and then he was gone. The house felt even quieter after that. George came home that night, carrying the same tired smile, the same empty excuses. He asked how things had been. I said fine, because that's what I always said. But inside, something had changed permanently. Now, months later, I still walk through that same house. The walls hold their silence like a secret. The air feels thick with memories that won't fade. Sometimes, I pass by the living room and see that same couch, and it feels like the past is still sitting there, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I wonder if Liam ever thinks about that summer, about how a few conversations and unspoken moments changed. The course of 2 lives, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's built something new, something untouched by the shadows of that house. But I still carry it, because some stories don't end. They just quiet down, and some mistakes don't fade. They become lessons, written in silence, remembered in the spaces where words once lived. If I've learned anything, it's that loneliness can make strangers out of the people we love, and sometimes out of ourselves. It can make us reach for connection in the wrong places. It can blur right and wrong until they're almost the same color. But guilt, as painful as it is, can also be a teacher. It reminds us that we still have a conscience, that we're still capable of caring, even if too late. Now, when I look at my reflection, I see a woman who has walked through silence and come out scarred, but aware. I don't hate the person I was. She was lost. Duh.